Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Chris Rusconi, who is the Chief Research Officer at the PKD Foundation, which stands for Polycystic Kidney Disease. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are the largest US-based patient group that is dedicated to PKD research and support. And if you're newer into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe, either on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about PKD, which, from the research I've done, sounds like a real horrible disease. But I'm curious to learn more. So Chris, I'm real grateful that you're taking the time to be with us today and spread awareness of this disease that I honestly hadn't heard of before I did research today. Thank you.
Well, Emil, just thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share what we're doing and to help educate people about polycystic kidney disease.
Thank you very much. So if you could make an introduction first of the PKD Foundation and kind of the work that we do, then we can get into the disease after that.
Wonderful. So the Polycystic Kidney Disease Foundation, or the PKD Foundation, is a US-based nonprofit. We were founded in 1982, originally as the Polycystic Kidney Disease Research Foundation by a wonderful PKD researcher named Jared Grantham. We're based in Kansas City, Missouri. As you said, we're the largest US-based advocacy group focused on polycystic kidney disease. And we really do that through trying to be with the patient all the way through their journey. And that includes funding and conducting research. It includes providing education. It includes providing direct patient support services. A lot of disease awareness, as well as advocacy in the US at the federal legislative level.
Okay. Well, thank you for painting that picture. So the disease then, what is polycystic kidney disease?
Yeah, it's great. It's interesting because we really support and serve two different patients communities with polycystic kidney disease, and the diseases differ by the genetic basis and the mode of transmission. One is called autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. That's the most common form of the disease. And as it says, it's an autosomal dominant. So it's passed from, if one parent carries the gene that's defective, there's a 50% chance of transferring that onto the child. The other form of the disease is called autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. It's a much rarer disease, occurrence probably about 1 in 25,000. And in that case, both parents would need to have a mutated form of the disease to pass it on to their child, to have a 25% chance of passing it on. The commonality between the diseases is that they both involve having cysts in kidneys. So cysts being a fluid-filled sac. And so the cysts multiply in the kidneys. And from there, they somewhat differ. The autosomal dominant form of the disease can also involve cysts in the liver and other systemic issues like intracerebral aneurysms, frequently high blood pressure, significant amount of pain, and other, think of connective tissue disorders, like if a cyst forms, could be hernias and that type of complication. The autosomal recessive form of the disease really starts to manifest in many cases aggressively in utero. And it not only involves the kidneys, but also involves what's called congenital hepatic fibrosis, or a disease of the liver. So there's a development defect whereby there's malformation of the liver that leads to a number of complications associated with the liver that causes other systemic manifestations, such as difficulties with the bile ducts, the transfer of bile fluids. The spleen becomes involved. There can be bleeding disorders. Again, various other fairly serious comorbidities. But so the tie that binds, again, is the cysts in the kidneys. And after that, both are fairly pernicious systemic diseases. They're chronic. They tend to progress slowly, which we can talk about the impact of that. It can be good and bad when it comes to developing therapies. But those are the diseases in an overview.
Thank you so much. I read on your website that it's something that stuck with me, at least, that this is a genetic disease. So you get it when you're born. It's painful, and it makes the kidney swell up. So normal kidney should be like a fist, and now it swells up to be something more like a football. And just that description just made me think that is awful. It's a curse to be born into that circumstance.
It's really difficult. And I think the emotional issue of this, especially with the autosomal dominant form, where you have a fairly high probability of passing it on to your children, I think that emotional aspect is very difficult within families. And then, right, the disease itself, when you think about, and we're lucky we're on a podcast and there's no pictures, but when you think about a kidney that goes from the size of a fist to the size of a football, very cystic, frequently in a patient, they may be carrying at latter stage of the diseases, 20 to 40 pounds of kidney weight, just immense, and a lot of pain because of the pressure and the distension of organs, body dysmorphia because of the change in the look, especially for autosomal dominant patients with autosomal dominant disease as it starts to manifest. So it's really an awful disease.
Yeah. So question that popped into my mind is that, okay, let's say I knew that I have this gene. How does that affect my chances to have children?
So it does. It's interesting. So there's not a direct effect on the ability to have children, but I think there's a really large impact on thinking about having children. And so now that the genes have been identified, and that particularly if you have an awareness that you have polycystic kidney disease in your family, there, I think, are a number of options in thinking about reproductive health and how one approaches having children that can range from proceeding along normal course of events to pre-implantation diagnosis to ensure that the child that you're having isn't born with polycystic kidney disease. And so there's a whole range of choices that, obviously, depending on families' values and belief systems, that they might pursue in thinking about having a family. Fortunately,
could you re-explain how that is done? Then, are you testing for the genetic defect in the?
So in pre-implantation diagnosis, one would go down the path of in vitro fertilization, and one would test particular embryos to see whether they did or did not carry the causative mutation, and then only implant embryos that did not contain the causative mutation as a way to ensure. And that's one option of thinking about reproductive health. There are now, fortunately, some disease modifying treatments for ADPKD. And so whereas 5 years ago there were no treatments available, there are now treatments available, and a number in the pipeline that will hopefully dramatically change the lives of people who have PKD.
It's good to hear that at least you have that option if you're thinking about having kids. Yeah. So do we know what the cause is for the disease?
We do. So we've known, I think it's obviously been known that both autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive PKD are genetic diseases. In about the mid-1990s, for autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, the two main mutations that cause the disease were identified. And so we do know what the genes are that are involved, which allows one. The disease is generally diagnosed by imaging, not by genetics, even though it's a genetic disease. But knowing those genes does help think about how does this disease manifest, what's going wrong at the cellular and the organ level. And then that allows one to start thinking about, well, how then do we start to develop disease modifying therapies that can reduce cyst growth, stop cyst growth, just, really with the goal of patients never reaching kidney failure. I didn't mention it, but with autosomal dominant kidney disease, it's the fourth leading cause of kidney failure worldwide, in the US at least, the largest genetic cause of kidney failure. And so about half of patients with autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease will reach kidney failure by the time they're in their mid-50s. So which is a really impactful event in someone's life to consider dialysis or transplant.
Yeah. Such a stress having that burden on you from birth as well. So you're interested in raising awareness, which makes a lot of sense. What would you like for people to know about this disease? I came in not knowing anything. What would you like for our listeners to know?
Boy, there's so many things. One is just to be aware of the disease, and if it occurs in the family, the importance of really sharing that information with family members, so that, you know, if one member of a family is impacted by the disease or affected by the disease, that means that there's very likely many people in the family that are affected by the disease. And so, you know, sharing that information and having the discussions within the family, I think, is really important. Understanding the need for continued research and for the development of treatments, I think, is also obviously something very critical for people to be aware of. We'd obviously like them to understand the work that the foundation is doing so that they engage with us. We think we provide a number of services and supportive information, not the least of which is, you know, really becoming educated about the disease, and then also the ongoing research, particularly clinical trials. So that one of the important things we try to do within the foundation is connect people to clinical trials so that they can empower their own, obviously, participation in research. And also, you know, the sooner clinical trials are enrolled and results are found, the sooner we'll know whether there are treatments that might be safe and efficacious. And of course, from the foundation's perspective, I think the other thing to be aware of is that we've started a outcomes research registry called the ADPKD registry. That's really important because if you think about ways that you can improve outcomes of the disease, one of the important ways is to understand how the disease progresses and how either treatments or lifestyle modifications may improve outcomes or harm outcomes. And so from a registry, which is collecting data in individuals over time, hopefully over a number of years, those become the sources of information that, in addition to developing treatments, might allow, or in addition to the development of treatments, would allow researchers to understand how to better manage the care of patients. And so I think that's a lot of things, Emil, but those are some of the things we'd like people to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you so much for that summary. So if we look forward then, what do you believe is going to happen, and what things are making you hopeful that we might improve in the future?
Well, I think so. And I'll talk to each disease state separately, because I think there's a really different picture for ADPKD and ARPKD. For ADPKD, we're really fortunate that that there's now a disease-modifying therapy that was approved in the U.S. in 2018 and approved in Europe earlier, called tolvaptan. You know, that came to be in part because of work from the foundation and other academic and industry collaborators to start to develop biomarkers for ADPKD such that clinical trials could be enrolled. It's really difficult for a slow progressing chronic disease to run a clinical study. But through the work from the consortium, we were able to help facilitate tools that allowed studies to be run in a reasonable amount of time. That led to the companies being willing to test drugs for the treatment of ADPKD, led to the approval of tolvaptan in 2018. And now there's a growing pipeline of drugs that are in testing to modify the progression of ADPKD. So that, I think, the exciting thing I think we have to look forward to is probably potential for new drugs to be approved in 2022 and 2023 timeframe, which would be great to have more than one potential treatment. So for ADPKD, that's one of the things we're really excited about. ARPKD is a very different story. There are no currently disease-modifying therapies to slow the progression of cyst growth in children and patients with ARPKD. There's really not disease-modifying treatments to affect the progression of the liver disease in children with ARPKD. And part of the reason we believe that is that I don't know if you're familiar with the drug development process, but generally regulators and the companies that develop drugs have to agree on what they're going to demonstrate, that what the drug is going to demonstrate that it modifies from an important clinical outcome to be approved. And for ARPKD, there's no regulatory path for treatments. So it's not understood how to develop drugs for ARPKD. So one of the things the foundation is working to do is, again, with this consortium that we're a part of called the Polycystic Kidney Disease Outcome Consortium, which is a collaboration with the Critical Path Institute, is to start working on engaging healthcare authorities, so members of the FDA, the European Medical Association, to try to understand how drugs could be developed to help kids with ARPKD. And so on the one hand, we're ADPKD, we're really excited about this growing pipeline and how to facilitate that. And on the other hand, on ARPKD, we're really have a lot of work to do to try to help foster and catalyze development of therapies for kids with ARPKD.
Thank you for painting that picture. I understand the complexity of solving something like this and the amount of people and research that needs to be involved to get clarity, especially when it's such a slow progressing disease.
It's really difficult. I think on one hand, a slow progressing disease is much better than having a rapid progressing disease. If I were a patient, I would prefer a slow progressing disease. The challenge is that if you're trying to develop a therapeutic, most reasonably a company might be interested in conducting a clinical trial where they could see the benefit of their drug over, say, a 2 to 3 year time frame. But if it takes 10 years to develop kidney failure, for example, and the regulatory agencies are going to say kidney failure is, you have to show a benefit in, reduction in kidney failure. Well, that's a really unreasonable, it's an unreasonable drug development pathway, and it becomes very difficult to develop therapies. And so kind of have to work with the whole ecosystem of industry, researchers, and regulators to come to new agreements about how to develop drugs for people with diseases like PKD that are chronic and slowly progressing, so that therapies can be brought forward. The diseases have a huge impact on people. They also have a huge impact on society, from cost of dialysis, cost of transplant, loss of quality of life due to kidney issues and the non-kidney issues. And so, with good education of regulators and urging for patients, we think you can bring those communities together and find good pathways for drug development.
Yeah, let's really hope for that. So what can someone listening to this then, and they want to take some positive steps to either help out or spread awareness or inform themselves, what can they do?
Well, certainly, I think from informing themselves, I think, we PKDcure.org provide really good information on disease education. We also provide some, I think at this stage, one of the largest challenges, I think, when people are diagnosed is just wondering what's next. And I think it's really important that they find good nephrology care. So we provide some resources, at least for the U.S., to find nephrologists who have expertise in polycystic kidney disease. And I think that's really critical, because there are a number of things people can do in terms of managing their blood pressure, eating a diet that is safe and kidney protective potentially, participating in clinical trials if it's appropriate for them and they're interested to, not necessarily that they might benefit from the clinical trial, but they may benefit from the results of the clinical trial. So I think that, that's really important. For people who are outside the US, obviously they can come to our website. There's a fantastic organization in the UK called pkdcharity.org.uk that provides some similar sets of services and information for European patients who have polycystic kidney disease. And so that's also a great resource and a great place to become educated. But I think a lot of it is education, awareness, discussing in the family, engaging in research, and really working to find good doctors who understand the disease. Because as with rare diseases, the number of physicians and healthcare providers who are expert is much smaller than for common diseases. And that can make a huge difference in patients receiving, good care, getting good information, and having the best possible chance of having a better outcome. So again, a mouthful, but all of those things I think are important.
All of them deserves to be mentioned.
Yeah.
And I feel your care for the people affected with this disease through this whole interview. It's been so interesting to learn. It felt like a blessing to be introduced to a topic I wasn't familiar with. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on and educate us today. I highly appreciate it.
No, we really appreciate the opportunity to provide information to your listeners. And I think, again, the more educated people are engaging in the research process, understanding the diseases and what we're trying to do to serve patients, I think the better.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And for you listening, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube in your podcast app, because that is showing the algorithms that this is an important conversation. So more people get the opportunity to learn about kidney disease, and so they can raise awareness and educate themselves. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. What is Great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is Great.com to learn more.